Welcome to Houston Sports Talk with your host, Robert Land.
Thanks for checking into the best Houston sports podcast. And joining me is Mike Capps, the original and only voice of the AAA Round Rock Express going back to 2000, and the co-author with ex-Major League pitcher Chuck Hartenstein of the fascinating new book, Grinders, Baseball's Intrepid Infantry. Great to have you on the show, Mike.
Well, it's great to be here. It's great to be on anything involved with the city of Houston, and you do such a great job. I've looked at a couple of your podcasts, and I'm really excited to be here with you.
Hey, man, I know you've got some roots in Houston and some great Astros connections, and we're going to get to it just a bit, but let's start with your book, Grinders. Explain the idea behind it, because I love the concept.
This came about 60 some odd years ago at Old Burnett Field in downtown Dallas, where the old Dallas-Fort Worth Rangers and the American Association played. My grandfather and I used to hang out there all the time. My grandfather was a Pirates prospect until he lost hearing in an ear, calling artillery fire in the Battle of the Argonne Forest. Pirates wanted to sign him. He had no balance when he came back, and so he just sort of channeled all of his baseball into me, and my dad was huge in it as well. Not little league parents at all, Robert. Here's a boy that really wants to learn about this game, and we're going to teach him, and they did. We're sitting there one night at Burnett Field, middle of the summertime, blazing hot. Minneapolis Millers, the Red Sox affiliate, playing the Dallas-Fort Worth Rangers. They were it was 1960. They were the Kansas City Athletics affiliate. And he said, he pointed, everybody was doing infield and outfield drills at that time. And he pointed to the left fielder and he said, that guy's going to be a star. Well, it was Carl Yastrzemski. I guess he was, a Hall of Famer. But he had 4 or 5 check marks on both sides of his scorecard. And I said, what are the check marks about? He said, well, it's very simple. You're going to see these guys in the big leagues, their names in the box scores in the newspaper every day for 2 or 3 or 4 days. Then they'll go away. They're going to be bouncing back and forth between AAA and the big leagues. He said, these are the guys that drives baseball's bus. Robert, that stuck with me forever. And in January of 2018, I woke up thinking about it, started writing down some notes. Chuck Hartenstein, the late Chuck Hartenstein, was signed by my cousin Billy Capps, who scouted for the Cubs for years and years. And I just took him on board and I said, I need some help with this. I got a lot of names. Can you help me sift through them? Well, he did. We lost Chuck on the last day of the season in 2021. But his name is going to be on every Grinders book I write. And I think I probably got 2 or 3 more with all the stuff I've come across. Beautifully, his wife passed 6 months later. And so we've lost, Karen, my wife, and I have lost a huge part of our soul losing Hartensteins. But that's the way it came about. And gosh, Robert, I finally found a publisher in Wimberley. And this guy used to be the business writer for the Chronicle. Lauren Steffi's his name. And we went to work. It's his first sports title. He's excited about it. I'm excited about it. And we're already starting to get some returns from people like Tim Kirkjian. So we're pretty jacked up about what we've done here.
Is there a player from the book with a connection back to the Astros or even here around Texas?
Well, let's think about Jason Lane. Let's think about Deacon Jones, who was the hitting coach for the Astros. Tal Smith is deeply involved in this book. He wrote the foreword to it, and he helped advise me through this, through thick and thin. And Tal's been a great friend and mentor for, since all the way back in my days at Channel 2, I was friends with him. So it's Houston centric. It's Rangers centric. There's like 3 profiles on Rangers, but at the end of the day, it's about the guys themselves and not necessarily the teams, because everybody's going to get a team, anybody who can sign, anybody who's good enough. And then after that, it's all on the front offices. So but I'm just sitting here just trying not to get overly excited. And I've had 2 cups of coffee and I'm ready. I'm already ready to roll. Once you and I are done, I'm going out and working out. I got to get this excitement out of me, man.
Hey, who's the guy that you wrote about that really sticks with you? Maybe a story that keeps you up or kept you up at night as you were writing these stories down.
Can I give you 2?
Sure.
One of them is Deacon Jones. Deacon Jones was a White Sox prospect during the Jim Crow South. He and Don Buford played together on a team, and they're going through the back roads trying to get to the next stop in the southeastern U.S. They all get out at a roadside cafe, and Don stayed on the bus, warned Deacon not to go in. Deacon had a shotgun pulled on him, and he was threatened. It's scared to death. Gets back on the bus. He's all upset. He calls home. He was raised around Schenectady, New York, and he calls home, and his dad grabbed the phone from his mom and said, "Are you done crying? You're scared to death." He said, "Yes, sir." So let me tell you something. You are not to ever let any man, black, white, green, brown, get in the way of your dream. You have your dream. You live your dream. Deacon lived his dream. He played in the big leagues, played in all throughout the Caribbean, and ended up becoming the hitting coach for the Astros for several years. And he's a dear friend to this day. The other one that really strikes me is Jeff Fry, the second baseman for the Rangers, who played for the Red Sox and some other teams. Jeff was not much of a prospect, a little bitty guy. Grew a little bit once he got into college. Was invited to a Rangers tryout camp. And unfortunately for him, he'd been in a boat accident and sliced his left hand. Yet he bandaged it up, put a rubber glove on top of that, and came out and hit a couple of home runs and impressed the scouts. They actually stopped down that tryout camp because he was wincing every time he catch a ball in his glove or every time he swung a bat. And the scout who was running that camp said, what's going on with you? He said, "Let me show you." He pulls off the glove, and there's blood all in it. And the guy signed him saying, "You know, you want to come out here and live your dream, and you're willing to bleed to do it. We really got to take you under our wing." And that's how he launched his major league career. And there's dozens of stories like this in this game. The lengths that athletes will go to get it in gear, number one, and then to make it to the big leagues and stick. That's the other.
Tell me a little bit more about your grandfather, because I know he was such a big inspiration to you. His story is pretty remarkable.
Well, it is. He was raised in the Allegheny Mountains in Warren County, Pennsylvania, about 100 miles north of Pittsburgh. Was a Pittsburgh Pirates fan. But we're talking about the 19 teens, and you get the Pittsburgh paper a day late. I mean, he kept up with it. Played semi-professional baseball up there, and some Pirate scouts saw him, and he said, "Listen, we really like you." And my grandfather says, "Well, I got World War I commitments." He said, "When you come back, come see us. Don't go home. Come right to Forbes Field, and we'll try you out." Well, I've already told you how the tryout went, but this guy went on and worked in the oil industry in Texas, brought his wife down. They had my mom and my uncle while they were in Texas, and he died at age 88, and there's not a day goes by that I don't think about him. My dad died when I was 17, a junior in high school. And my grandfather stepped up and went to every one of my high school sports events, every one of my college sports events, didn't miss one. That guy was remarkable. And he was such a peaceful soul. You had to pull things out of him. And it was one of those gifts from God. This is the only way you can talk about who my grandfather was in my life.
You mentioned your high school baseball career, and I'm going to connect it right back to that, because Grinders, actually your second book, your first one about the legendary scout Red Murff, who was the guy who discovered Nolan Ryan. Not only did Murph scout Nolan, he also scouted a high school baseball player named Mike Capps, who ended up playing a little JUCO ball in Hillsboro, Texas, which is actually where my grandfather was born and where we buried him 13 years ago. So I am familiar with Hillsboro. What do you remember about being scouted by Red Murff?
Well, I don't remember much. And Red reminded me of this stuff. I had hit 2 doubles in a game against a right-handed pitcher that Red later told me was the second fastest pitcher he saw in Texas up until that time. and the guy never made it, whatever. But so I remember seeing Red at games, but I don't remember much else. That first game that he saw, I was actually a sophomore, and I'd already had had a chance to be the varsity quarterback starter, but I ended up having 6 concussions, and that ended that. Well, I get a call from him in May of 1969, my senior year in high school, to come to this tryout camp in Brenham. It was, and it was guys from all over the state. It wasn't one of those mass call tryouts that they have sometimes. This was a pretty select group of people. And I ran very fast up first base and 60s for him. And, but he wouldn't let me hit, Robert. He wouldn't let me hit. And it really, really pissed me off. And I sat there for an hour and a half. And finally, I made an obscene gesture and I left. And 30 years later, 20 years later, wherever it was, when Nolan was coming to the Rangers, I was doing a documentary on Nolan. And I remembered Red had been the scout who signed him. So I called him up on the phone in Brenham and I said, hey, here I am. Here's who I am. Are you going to be where we could interview you for this documentary? He said, well, I'm going to be in Arlington tomorrow. So we met at this ballpark. I'm sitting across from him and he reaches over and punches me, my chest. And he said, you're the dumbest SOB I ever met in my life. Now, by this time, I was working at WFAA in Dallas, and we had busted the SMU football program, and I was involved in a big part of that. And I'm saying, excuse me? And he says, May the 29th, 1969, Fireman's Park, Brenham, Texas. 2.38s to first, 2.64 60s. Yes, sir. He says, what you didn't know, we left you way down the right field line by yourself. We didn't want anybody else to see you were there. He said, I hadn't seen any other scouts there. He said, what we were going to try to do was sign you to a free agent contract after the draft and send you out to see if those legs would play. And so now I'm feeling really terrible, right? And he said, but there's a second reason you're the dumbest SOB. I said, there really have to be two? Are you kidding me? He said, yeah, there were 12 Division I college coaches wondering where you went. And so, but you know, I'm a believer, and I believe that things happen for a reason. He goes into his pocketbook, hands me a scout's card, and I worked part-time for him for 7 or 8 years, help him run off tryout camps. And then when I quit CNN, I called him up and I said, you and I are going to write a book. And we did. And that's what got me back into baseball. And we're out promoting that book in spring training in '96, Angels camp in Arizona. And Bob Starr, the legendary late broadcaster for the Angels, is interviewing Red about the book. And I keep hearing this voice, you can do this, you can do this. So in between innings, I say to him, I'm 45 years old. Am I too old to get started in this? He says, you're a puppy. 2 phone calls later, Robert, I get a job as the radio broadcaster for the Texas Louisiana League's Tyler Wildcatters. And that's how I got started. That's how that whole thing happened.
I want to spin it back to Nolan. Incredible story, because, you know, I don't know if you can see it over my shoulder, but I've got a Nolan Ryan signed baseball. I've got this Nolan Ryan program. He was my hero growing up. Like a ton of people, I just saw the Nolan documentary in a theater a few weeks ago. You've worked for a team that Nolan's been so much a part of over the years. Can you give us your favorite Nolan Ryan story?
Nolan Ryan's story? Yes, I can, as a matter of fact. In 2003, we had a very poor AA team. It was our 2001, 4th year in the Texas League. 20-50 at the end of the first half. So I'm walking out of the press box and out across the parking lot into my car, and Ruth and Nolan were walking out as well. And Ruth hollers, Mike. So I stopped and went over, and I'm grinning at him and they're grinning at me. And Nolan comes up and he puts his arm around my shoulder. Ruth puts her arm around my waist, and Nolan says, Mike, I don't know who has a worse job. Jackie Moore trying to manage that, or you trying to talk about it? And you know what? It's He's such a wonderful guy. He's low key. We don't see him that much, and I think that's by his preference. But golly, what a presence when he's around.
Yeah, I mean, just the thing that you just don't see a whole lot, which you get to see a little bit more of. We don't see a whole lot of Nolan's sense of humor. He doesn't show it a lot in his commercials. He never really showed it much as a player, but it's there. I know it's there, and I'm sure you're also very connected with his son Reed, who was with
Yep.
the Astros for a few years, and we
Yep.
loved him here. And it was just such an important guy to have around
Oh yeah.
when the Astros were trying to reconnect with the entire community in Houston.
Well, let me take it a generation further. Reed's son Jackson is finishing up at Mary Hardin Baylor, and this summer he is working as a scouting intern for the Kansas City Royals. And I'm not sure that a better baseball mind exists in the country than Jackson Ryan at age 21. This kid is going to be something. He can analyze players like nobody's business. He sounds more like a 15 to 20-year veteran scout. When you stop and think about it, he also pitched D3 with cerebral palsy. Now how the heck did that happen? Well, he's the closer in this book, Grinders, because of that very reason, but also because of this baseball mind. I mean, he'll come in the booth when he has a scouting assignment at Dell Diamond, and he'll go through chapter and verse. And I'm working on pregame stuff, right? Well, it's amazing things that I see. He not only sees them, but he can take you into the depths of why they are the way they are, and why a certain player plays the way he plays, and are they using him the right way? Is he where does he top out? And Jackson's mind is constantly working, and his supervisor is a special assistant to the Kansas City Royals president. His name is Gene Watson. And he says, I do baseball every day. He said, I have to take some breaks. I have to take some mental breaks. He said, I don't think Jackson ever takes a mental break. And you know what? This to me is like the scouting version of who Nolan was as a young pitcher. If you follow my drift. I mean, I think Jackson has that ability, the God-given ability in his realm of baseball that Nolan had in his, and that Reed has in the business end of it, and the combination of knowing how to work the business side with the player personnel side. I mean, Reed was a savant at that, and it still is. And Jackson's a savant, and then Nolan, we already know about that. That's given. I mean, greatest pitcher of all time had to be. But what a family, and they're just so much fun to be around.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure, I'm sure, for you to just be a part of all that.
Absolutely.
And the Round Rock Express, people know here that they were an Astros affiliate back in 2000 when you first started your inaugural season. Tell our listeners who was on the inaugural Round Rock Express team.
Well, let's see. The names you'll remember. Let's start with Roy Oswalt. Let's go to Morgan Ensberg, Keith Ginter. Morgan and Keith were called up to the Astros in mid-September of 2000, the night we won the Texas League Championship, in front of 11,000 people on the third Texas high school football night. That's just for that to have that many people show up to a professional baseball game was just, I can't quantify it. I mean, and I could see from my spot in the press box all the way down Highway 79, almost to Hutto, cars lined up trying to get in and couldn't get in. I mean, if we'd had space for 20,000, we'd have had 20,000 there that night. There was that much enthusiasm for that team. And you know what? I still have contact with all those guys. Just great kids. Tim Purpura, still a dear friend, was the general manager. And it's, gosh, such great memories.
Tell us about Roy. What do you remember about him that year?
I remember that we were stumbling a little bit. San Antonio was the Dodgers in those days, and they were salty. Well, Roy gets a quote unquote one-time visit to AA, and he dominates that San Antonio team. And they were, for AA hitters, they were excellent. And Roy struck out 15, and Tim Purpura was there that night, and they're talking about putting him back on a plane, Roy back on a plane to Kissimmee, back to A ball. And Jackie Moore was the manager, and Jackie was, bench coach there for the Astros and in Arlington and in Cincinnati and other places. And they're saying to Purpura, don't send him. This guy needs to be here. He needs to be. Well, he stayed, and that was, to me, the turning point in that season, because it was going to be a battle for us to win the first half championship as long as San Antonio was dominating us. And it seemed like Roy pitched in every San Antonio series and just shut them down. And we ended up winning the first half, and El Paso won the second half. We beat them I'm in El Paso now, getting ready to do a game. So funny how these things turn around. But in 11 innings, we win against El Paso. Colin Porter hit a homer over the center field wall in that old ballpark, then made a diving catch with runners at second and third for the final out to win it. We went on to Wichita and then back to Round Rock, and that was the Texas League Championship year of 2000. And people just went nuts. The celebration on the field after that game, Robert, was incredible. People stayed around at 1:32 in the morning just talking. Everybody wanted to talk. Everybody was awash in that. And the Astros played right along with it and understood. I mean, there hadn't been professional baseball in the Austin area since 1967. So, they were hungry for it. And it was quite a year.
What's the percentage of Astros fans compared to Texas Rangers fans in that area? Just out of curiosity, with both teams playing for those.
Here's what's happened, in my opinion. I would have said at one time it's 48-52 Astros. But you got to remember, Austin wasn't 1 million people when we came to Central Texas. Austin was like 750, 800,000. Well, it's the city itself's banging on the door of 2 million right now. And that entire area is huge. And a lot of people from California, and we've got A's fans, we've got Dodgers fans, we've got all sorts of people who are coming to our place. Unfortunately, Major League Baseball took the Cubs away from us, put them over in the International League. The same for the Royals, though they were big. But the bottom line is the fan base, I think, and my bosses may disagree with me, I think it's dispersed. I think as long as we have a 10-year deal with the Rangers, we'll see a lot of Rangers fans. If we ever go back to who knows how any of this works out anymore now that Major League Baseball has taken over what we do. But I'd say if anything, it's probably a 50-50 split, but there's more to it. It may not be quite that high simply because the population base is stand out so much.
Before you got into baseball, you had this whole other career, which is it's worth a whole other hour, where you worked for ABC News and CNN. But even before that, you spent the 80s covering 16 space shuttle missions and Hurricane Alicia for WFAA in Dallas, if I got all that correct. But you go back to Houston in the 70s, and you were working at what station?
At KPRC TV, Channel 2. We drove around in those orange Mustang Fastback with police interceptor engines, way too much engine but we were racing the cop news. And that's what I did. I covered police news, and I still have dear friends who were police officers in those days, and they can't believe I survived that because of I went to the hospital 5 times in 6 months. Varying injuries on varying crazy news stories. I got hit by a car once, and on and on it goes. But what beautiful years. Ray Miller was a tremendous news director there forever and ever, and just challenged us every single day. And I just have such beautiful memories of those days, even though, I got shot at covering drug raids, and the whole thing was wild, wild west times mock. But but for a young guy, I came to Channel 2, let's see, when 70, I was 23 years old as a police beat reporter. Now that's awfully young for a job like that, but it sure worked out. And working on the police beat is quintessential in the dirt, mano a mano reporting. It just is. And it's just, you never know what's going to happen from one moment to the next. And sometimes, I mean, I can remember being up 2 days at a time, just chasing the same kind of story. It's just, but it was an amazing place to be. Houston was in that big burst where you'd drive through the freeways, around the freeways, and you'd see license plates from 17, 18 states, folks flocking to Houston because of the growth. And it was just an exciting time to be in Houston. 2 of my 3 daughters were born at what was called Women's Hospital in those days. They love their Houston roots to this day, and are thankful that they were born where they were born. And it's just, I have such sweet, wonderful memories of Houston.
I kind of dwell on this a little bit because to me, it's just this time and this era that I can't explain to people. So I try to get some of my guests to, and I've had on a few of the Houston Oilers from that era.
Oh my.
What was it like to be here, and explain to people, if you can, what Love You Blue was, because that was happening in your last few years in Houston.
Yeah. And you know what? It was so much fun. And I didn't have any role in covering any of that, but you had Bum Phillips. And when you had Bum Phillips, that set the stage for everything. You added Carl Mock, and you added Dan Pastorini, and you added Kenny Burroughs, and you added all the wildness that went on at Oilers games. Earl Campbell comes along and begins to bulldoze people. And that's how Love You Blue to me was born, just being an ancillary guy on the fringes of it, following it. But I'm not sure that, and having lived in Dallas, Fort Worth, and seeing the Cowboys, you talk about a 180 difference. The Houston Oilers, to me, it broke my heart when they moved to Nashville, because the Houston Oilers to me were sort of like the Pittsburgh Steelers South. The fans were so rabid and so intense and loved them so much. And that, to me, that's where the Love You Blue came from. Just the love they had. It was such a mind altering time anyway. And to see this, it just blew up. And the Astros were around, and Larry Durker was pitching for the Astros in those days, and he and I are still friends, and the whole bit, but Love You Blue was special simply because of the passion and fire and verve that Bum Phillips brought to everybody. And Bum Phillips loved that place, loved those players, each and every one of them. And you could tell when he talked about them. He just was, Bum Phillips is one of those kind of guys that we need more of in this country now. Just honest from here out. And what a breath of fresh air he was every single time you talked to him.
Did you own a set of cowboy boots and a cowboy hat at that period of time?
Yeah, I did. And you know what's funny? You bring that up. I did my 3,000th game in April for Round Rock, and one of the things they gave me is a custom pair of Lucchese Roper boots that has the interlocking red and white double R's on the front of the boots, and they're in the process of making those. So yeah, and my dad was the oddest combination of cattle rancher and undertaker you ever saw, but his passion in life was his cattle ranch. And so I was raised in the cattle pens, and my brother's still in that business. I never got into it, but yeah, I can wear cowboy boots and jeans with anybody.
And you caught the early years of Ron Stone and Doug Johnson and all, and it's hard to explain for younger people that was a news team that had this just really deep connection. I mean, I grew up with the muscular dystrophy telethon and those guys and what they did for that, but that was all part of it. They really connected with this place, and it was a big small town back then.
It was that is a perfect description. A big small town. Robert, Ron Stone, Larry Rasco, Doug Johnson, Bill Worrell, all those guys were involved deeply in the very essence of that community. They could run with the oil people, they could run with the rich people, they could run with the cowboys at the Astrodome during rodeo time. They just knew how to relate to people, and it's such a different era in television news now. I'm not saying that there aren't great people doing great things. I'm just saying this was a more down on the level of people kind of news coverage, and it just was a different era. I don't know any other way to explain it except that I think we've evolved out of that now somewhat. Just no more TV news than I see all over the country.
Real quick, last thing. So you left, I believe, in 1980, right?
Correct.
So that was right around the time that Urban Cowboy came out.
Yep.
And Gillies was was blowing up, and I grew up in Sharpstown. And tell me, do you remember this at all? So I was reading in the Chronicle that John Travolta went to a premiere of Urban Cowboy at Sharpstown, at the old Sharpstown Mall. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah, that's right. Now that he did that, the guy who was running the newsroom in 80 fired 17 of us, like within 10 days. And so I had three little kids at that time, and was, sort of pulled in a lot of different directions, but I do remember that, and it did make a splash, and quite a big splash. Gillies itself was a whole different trip, and you could, if you didn't walk in there with the right look on your face, you could get into trouble really quick. Just saying. But what a trip! I mean, it was just a blast.
Yeah, it was an incredible time. I wish I was older to really understand and experience a little bit, but man, between your baseball career and your news career, we can do a whole other hour, but I know you got some baseball games to call, and you're going to go work out. And if our listeners want a great summer baseball read, the book is Grinders, Baseball's Intrepid Infantry. I'll put a link to it in the show description. And I can't tell you how much I appreciate you coming on. Thanks so much for giving us a few minutes today, Mike.
Let me tell you, Robert, anytime you want me, I'm here, bud.
You're listening to Houston Sports Talk.
Don't forget to follow Houston Sports Talk on Facebook and Twitter. Subscribe to us on iTunes, Spotify, the Google Podcast app, or the Stitcher app. You can support us by giving us a 5-star review on iTunes, or by telling your friends about us. Spread the word, everybody. Thanks for listening.